There's something quietly powerful about those who remain steady in the midst of noise. Not because they've stopped caring, but because they've started choosing what's worth their energy. We've all seen them. The kind of person who doesn't flinch when criticized, doesn't crumble under pressure, and doesn't chase validation in rooms that never saw them clearly to begin with. And we wonder how they do it. How they remain so composed while the rest of us are unraveling just trying to keep up. The answer isn't that they feel nothing. The answer is, they've trained for this. Being unbothered is not a personality trait. It's a practice, a commitment to self-leadership that few are willing to make. Because the truth is, the world teaches us the opposite. It teaches us to react, to seek applause, to prove ourselves at every turn. And in doing so, we hand over our peace in exchange for momentary approval. We become performers instead of participants in our own lives. But it doesn't have to be that way. To be unbothered is not to become numb. It's to feel fully without letting those feelings take the wheel. It's not about detaching from humanity. It's about anchoring deeper into it. It's the ability to hear the noise and not let it dictate your next move. To feel the sting of disrespect and choose not to respond with chaos. To recognize manipulation and still hold your posture. To sense judgment and not shrink. And that difference, that pause, is where the power lives. Emotional control is not about suppression. It's about clarity. It's the skill of separating what happened from how we choose to respond. That space between event and reaction is small, but it's everything. Most people miss it because they've never trained for it. They get hit, they react. Someone doubts them, they spiral. Someone disrespects them, they lash out or shut down. And every time they do, they confirm the belief that peace is something outside their control. But the most composed people are not the ones with perfect lives. They're the ones who decided not to give every situation the right to shake them. They don't react because they're cold. They respond because they're clear. They don't avoid emotions. They hold them long enough to understand them, and then they act, not from impulse, but from principle. That's the difference between someone who's constantly triggered and someone who lives in alignment. This isn't magic. This isn't a gift reserved for the few. This is discipline. This is the result of choosing to pause when it's easier to explode, to listen when it's tempting to defend, to walk away when the ego demands you stay and prove something. Those are hard choices, but they are the building blocks of a life grounded in strength. Because what you allow, you teach. Every time you let someone cross a boundary without consequence, you send a message. Every time you tolerate disrespect in the name of peace, you're quietly announcing that your dignity is optional. And over time, people believe you. Not because you told them, but because you showed them. Not through words, but through silence. And slowly, your peace becomes collateral damage. The decision to be unbothered is not about arrogance. It's about ownership. It's the quiet decision to stop handing out the remote to your emotional state. To stop letting someone else's immaturity create chaos in your mind. It's not easy, and it won't happen all at once, but it's worth it. Because the most powerful people in the room are not those who shout the loudest. They are the ones who know exactly what deserves a reaction and what simply doesn't. There's something subtle but profound in how people treat you. It rarely begins with something obvious. It starts with a small comment that makes you uncomfortable. A canceled plan without explanation. A tone that makes you second-guess your worth. And when you say nothing, when you smile and let it pass, you're not just avoiding conflict, you're teaching. You're teaching people how to treat you. We often think that boundaries are about confrontation, but they're really about clarity. They are not walls to keep people out. They are signals, clear and steady, that say this is who I am and this is how I expect to be treated. And the moment you lower those signals out of fear of being alone, fear of being misunderstood, fear of appearing too much, you start to lose something more important than comfort. You start to lose yourself. It's easy to set boundaries when you feel strong. It's harder to keep them when tested. That's where the real training begins. Because the test never arrives with warning. It arrives in guilt. In someone calling you selfish. In someone you care about being disappointed. And in that moment you'll be tempted to bend, to excuse the behavior, to say yes when your body says no. And that's when the erosion begins. The erosion is silent. You think you're keeping the peace, but what you're really doing is postponing the explosion. You think you're being kind, but what you're really doing is enabling a pattern that chips away at your self-respect. And over time, you find yourself in a life where you're constantly putting out emotional fires that someone else started. You're explaining yourself to people who never listen. You're defending your value to people who should have seen it the first time. Being unbothered is not just about staying calm in chaos. It's about building a life where chaos doesn't have a key to your door. And that begins with boundaries. The kind you don't just declare but uphold. Not because it's easy, but because you've decided that your peace is non-negotiable. The truth is, not everyone will like it. Some will call you distant. Some will say you've changed. But what they're really saying is this: your tolerance once served their comfort, and now it no longer does. And that discomfort is not your burden to carry. You're not responsible for making people comfortable with your growth. The moment you begin honoring yourself, the people who benefited from your silence will protest the loudest. They'll ask you to explain, to soften, to go back to who you used to be. But that version of you was never peaceful. That version of you was performing. The real you values presence over pleasing. The real you knows that protecting your energy is not selfish. It's necessary. So when someone treats you in a way that makes you question your worth, don't ask why they did it. Ask why you stayed silent. Ask what part of you still believes that being loved means being smaller. Ask what you've been afraid to lose that's made you compromise so much. Because the truth is, the first time is information. The second time is a decision. And every time after that is a pattern. You don't become unbothered by ignoring disrespect. You become unbothered by refusing to entertain it. You don't gain peace by avoiding hard conversations. You gain peace by having them early, clearly, and without apology. The people who are meant for you will never be threatened by your standards. They will rise to meet them. Boundaries are not barriers to love. They are the conditions that make real love possible. Because without self-respect, love becomes need. Without clarity, love becomes confusion. And without truth, love becomes performance. And you deserve more than that. You deserve connection that honors you fully, not just the version of you that's convenient. So start with one decision, one conversation, one truth spoken without shrinking. You don't need to announce your boundaries to the world. You just need to live them. The right people will adjust. The wrong ones will exit. And both outcomes are a gift. Emotional resilience is not about how tough you look on the outside. It's about how steady you remain when everything around you tries to pull you apart from the inside. We often think it's a personality trait, something you're born with. But it's not. It's a skill. And like any skill, it's built through repetition. Through small, unglamorous moments when you choose to hold your ground rather than give in to chaos. Most people believe they'll become strong by avoiding what hurts. But resilience is never built through avoidance. It's built through presence. Through choosing to stay, even when it's uncomfortable. Through facing the truth, even when it challenges your ego. Through responding with intention, when reaction would be easier. Think of the last time someone said something passive-aggressive, and you carried it with you for the rest of the day. Or the last time you were criticized and spiraled into self-doubt. Those are not failures. Those are training moments, and how you move through them determines whether you grow stronger or simply more reactive. The ones who appear unshakable didn't get there by accident. They didn't wake up with thick skin and a balanced heart. They earned it. They practiced it. They lived through disappointment without letting it define them. They listened to criticism without allowing it to rewrite their identity. They heard silence, rejection, failure, and instead of breaking, they leaned into clarity. This kind of resilience doesn't arrive with applause. It arrives in solitude. It shows up when you sit with emotions you'd rather run from, when you calm yourself without needing someone else to fix it, when you acknowledge that something hurt without making it your whole story. That's the quiet work no one sees. And that's why it's rare. Most people skip this part. They reach for distractions. They look for someone to validate their pain instead of understanding it. They wait for closure instead of deciding they can move forward without it. They call a friend, not to process, but to be told they're right. And in doing so, they miss the invitation to grow. Real growth isn't loud. It's not in the moments you post about. It's in the choice to pause, to breathe, to feel, and to respond from alignment instead of fear. It's in choosing not to internalize someone else's mood, not to match their energy, not to be dragged into drama just because you were invited. Emotional resilience is built every time you choose your peace over proving a point. Every time you choose silence over defensiveness. Every time you respond to a harsh word with clarity instead of anger. It's not weakness, it's maturity. The maturity of someone who knows they don't need to win every battle to be strong. They just need to win the one within themselves. And yes, you'll stumble. You'll react too fast. You'll say things you regret. That's part of the process. But if you keep coming back to that pause, if you keep choosing presence, if you keep reminding yourself that not every emotion needs to be expressed to be honored, you'll grow quietly, powerfully, consistently. You'll start noticing the difference, not just in how you feel, but in how you carry yourself. You'll notice that situations that once consumed your energy no longer deserve a response. You'll notice that people who once had the power to ruin your day no longer have that access. You'll notice that your peace isn't just an idea anymore. It's a practice, a center, a standard you return to no matter how loud the world becomes. Because emotional resilience isn't about never feeling hurt. It's about not living from the wound. It's about bouncing back, not by ignoring the fall, but by choosing how you rise. And that choice, repeated over and over, becomes who you are. There's a form of dependence that feels harmless at first. It hides behind compliments. It wraps itself in applause. It makes you feel seen, appreciated, worthy. And yet, slowly, it becomes the quiet chain that keeps you from being whole. It's the addiction to validation. And like all addictions, it begins with a need unmet from within. At first it looks like confidence. You post something and the likes flood in. You speak and people agree. You share and others applaud. For a moment you feel full, but then it fades. And you reach again. Another post, another conversation, another moment of hoping someone will remind you that you're enough, that you matter, that you're doing okay. This chase seems small, but it has a cost. Because every time you seek validation, you give someone else the right to define your worth. You hand over the mirror, and you wait for them to tell you who you are. You adjust your tone, your posture. Your choice is not for alignment, but for acceptance. And in doing so, you start living a version of your life that is no longer yours. The problem is not that we like being appreciated. Appreciation is beautiful. The problem is when we depend on it, when our peace swings with other people's opinions, when one compliment lifts us and one criticism crushes us. That's when we know we've built something fragile, something that cannot stand on its own. The most grounded people you will ever meet are not the ones constantly affirmed. They're the ones who are deeply anchored in who they are even when the room is silent. They don't need to be liked to move forward. They don't need to be seen to feel real. They've built something internal, a compass, a code, a calm that doesn't depend on applause. And that clarity gives them power. Not the kind that controls others, but the kind that frees them. Because when you're no longer performing for approval, you become honest. You speak truthfully. You live fully. You choose paths that align, not impress. And in that space, life becomes simpler. Not easier, but simpler. There's less noise, less negotiation, less need to shrink. But getting there means facing the part of you that still wants to be chosen. The part that asks, am I enough yet? The part that bends for love, that softens truth to stay liked, that stays silent to avoid discomfort. That part isn't weak, it's simply misunderstood. It needs not more praise but more presence, not more applause but more alignment. You don't fix validation addiction by yelling at yourself to be stronger. You fix it by reconnecting with what matters. By asking, what would I do if no one clapped? What would I say if no one agreed? Would I still choose this path if it brought no spotlight? And when you start living in a way that answers those questions honestly, you begin to heal. Slowly, deeply. You learn to offer yourself the approval you've been outsourcing. You stop chasing and start building. You stop begging and start becoming. You shift from being a mirror to being a light that doesn't need to be reflected to stay lit. A light that knows its value in the dark. And yes, people might pull away. Not everyone knows how to love someone who doesn't need them to feel whole. Not everyone understands presence without performance. But that loss is not a threat. It's a clearing. A space being made for people who are drawn to you not because you entertain them, but because you remind them of something true. The truth is, you were never meant to be shaped by the hands of others. You were meant to be shaped by values, by integrity, by courage. And when those become your source of stability, the world's opinion becomes just that, an opinion, not a verdict. So start today. Notice when you reach for reassurance. Pause when you crave applause. And instead of asking, do they see me? Ask, am I standing in my truth? That question, asked daily, will free you, not instantly, but eventually. And when it does, you'll no longer be chasing permission to be yourself. You'll simply be. There's something unsettling about being misunderstood. It doesn't matter how grounded you are, how well you've prepared, how kind your intentions are, when someone takes your words, your actions, or your silence and twists them into something they were never meant to be. It stings. It makes you want to explain, to fix it, to prove that you're not who they've decided you are. But here's the truth, few want to admit. If you spend your life correcting every misjudgment, you'll never have time to live it. People will always see you through the lens of their own fears, their own wounds, their own limited understanding. They will take a single moment and write a story. They will build assumptions without context. They will shrink your complexity into something easier to criticize. And if you let their projections shape your truth, you'll lose sight of who you really are. You're not obligated to convince anyone of your worth. That's a hard truth, especially when you've spent years trying to be understood. Especially when you were raised to believe that approval is the reward for doing everything right. But approval is not the goal, and is not the proof of a life well lived. When someone labels you unfairly, when they question your motives, when they misunderstand your silence, or mistake your strength for arrogance, the temptation will always be to step in and defend. But you must ask yourself, what part of me feels threatened right now? What part of me still believes that being seen accurately by everyone is the only way to feel safe? Because here's what's true. You don't owe access to people who aren't committed to understanding you. You don't owe emotional clarity to those who only listen to respond. You don't owe explanation after explanation to someone who's already made up their mind. Your energy is precious, and so is your peace. And there comes a time when the most responsible thing you can do is protect both. That doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you start discerning. You begin to ask a different question, not, do they approve of me? But, Am I living in alignment with my values? Not do they believe I'm good, but did I act from integrity? When that becomes your metric, criticism loses its power. Misunderstanding becomes background noise, not a crisis. The most confident people you'll ever meet are not the ones who argue well. They're the ones who've stopped arguing altogether. Not because they're indifferent, but because they've chosen clarity over chaos. They've realized that explaining yourself to those unwilling to hear is not communication with its emotional debt. You give and leave empty. And in that emptiness, doubt creeps in. But when you learn to sit with being misunderstood without needing to fix it, something shifts. You reclaim your authority. You reclaim your focus. You reclaim your voice. You stop editing yourself just to stay likable. You stop shrinking your ideas to avoid friction. You stop performing safety for the sake of others' comfort. Because you know this, if someone's approval depends on a version of you that isn't real, then what they admire isn't actually you. Training yourself to be unbothered isn't about building walls. It's about building roots. A strong foundation that isn't shaken by every breeze of opinion. You don't respond to everything not because you have nothing to say, but because you finally decided your peace matters more than your image. And yes, some people will walk away when you stop explaining. Some will call you cold, arrogant, distant. But those are often the people who were never really listening. They were watching, judging, measuring. And now that you've stopped performing, they no longer know how to place you. That is not your burden. That is not your responsibility. Let them misunderstand you. Let them think what they want. Because in time, those who matter will either come closer or reveal why they were never meant to stay. You, on the other hand, will move forward not with noise, but with clarity, not with explanation, but with consistency. And slowly, your life will stop being a stage and start becoming a sanctuary. Not everyone will applaud, but you will breathe easier. And that breath, steady and strong, is the sound of someone who finally chose peace over proving. Calm is underrated. In a world that rewards reaction, that praises the loudest voice in the room, that confuses urgency with importance, calm is often mistaken for weakness. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Calm is clarity. Calm is presence. Calm is the quiet strength of someone who no longer trades energy for attention. We live in an age of constant stimulation. Every notification is a demand. Every disagreement is an invitation to argue. Every delay is a threat to our sense of control. And so we respond quickly, emotionally, often without thinking. Because somewhere along the way we were taught that if you don't react, you don't care. That silence is avoidance. That stillness is passivity. But the people who have done the work know better. They've learned that the most powerful response is not always a word. Sometimes it's a pause. Sometimes it's walking away. Sometimes it's choosing to hold your peace instead of defending your position. And in those choices, they build something rare. A kind of authority that doesn't require validation. A kind of focus that doesn't need noise to feel alive. Being calm does not mean being detached. It means being deliberate. It means choosing not to let every disruption dictate your state. It means seeing the chaos without becoming part of it. It means feeling the rise of emotion and still holding the ability to choose what comes next. That is not passivity. That is power. The people who master calm are not immune to the world. They just refuse to let the world manage their reactions. They still feel anger, fear, sadness, irritation. But those emotions no longer make the decisions. They inform, but they do not command. And that distinction changes everything. Because once you realize you can feel fully without reacting impulsively, you begin to move differently. You stop chasing closure in every conversation. You stop correcting every misunderstanding. You stop giving attention to every opinion that enters the room. You don't do it out of pride. You do it out of alignment. You know what matters, and you protect it from distraction. Calm people aren't boring. They're focused. They conserve energy. They recognize that emotional responses are transactions, And not every situation is worth the cost. They understand that sometimes your silence says more than your defense ever could. Not because you don't have the words, but because you've stopped needing to prove you're right. You can feel this energy when they walk into a room. It's steady. It's subtle. It's not there to dominate, but it grounds everything around it. While others rush to be heard, they listen. While others prepare to fight, they observe. And when they speak, it's not to impress, it's to direct. Calm people don't react to pressure, they respond to purpose. That's the difference. If you want to train yourself to be unbothered, don't start by trying to be stoic. Start by noticing. Notice what makes you feel rushed. Notice what makes you feel small. Notice what pulls you out of character. And then pause. That pause is where the shift begins. That pause is where you start leading yourself instead of being led by everything else. In that space, you'll feel the discomfort, the desire to speak, to react, to correct. But if you wait, even just a moment longer, something else will surface. Clarity. A reminder of what you actually value. A deeper understanding of whether this is worth your voice. And more often than not, you'll find that it isn't. The world will keep spinning. People will test you. Situations will unfold outside your control. But calm gives you the ability to stay centered within all of it. It allows you to respond from truth instead of fear, from vision instead of impulse, from presence instead of panic. And when that becomes your baseline, life stops feeling like a battlefield. It becomes something steadier, not quieter, but clearer, not easier, but lighter. Because calm is not the absence of conflict. It is the refusal to let conflict steal your peace. So the next time you feel the urge to explain, to defend, to argue, ask yourself one thing. Not, how do I win this? But, is this worth my peace? And if the answer is no, let silence be your strength. Let stillness be your answer. Let calm be your power. There comes a moment when you realize that most of what pulls you down doesn't come from the outside. It's not the words people say. It's not the chaos in the room. It's not even the judgment that follows your choices. It's how you respond to it. It's the way you let it inside. The way you let it echo long after the moment has passed. And that's the final truth. You don't need to fight every battle. You don't need to react to every mood. You don't need to fix every misunderstanding. Because if you do, you'll spend your life in a loop, a cycle of reaction, a pattern where your peace is always at the mercy of someone else's behavior. But you weren't built to live like that. You were built to lead yourself, to anchor within, to move with intention, not impulse, to act from alignment, not emotion. And that shift, when it happens, changes everything. Suddenly, you stop getting baited by familiar traps. The same comments that used to trigger you don't. The same silence that once made you spiral doesn't. You notice the patterns, but you don't repeat them. You respond, but you don't react. You observe, but you don't absorb. This is what it means to be unbothered. Not detached, not cold, not indifferent, but clear. Clear about what matters. Clear about who you are. Clear about the energy you allow into your life. And when you live from that clarity, you don't need to prove anything. You don't need to convince anyone. You simply continue. Because presence is louder than performance. Peace is stronger than panic. And the people who are truly in control are not the ones making the most noise. They're the ones who've stopped needing to make any at all. You'll start to notice something. The more grounded you become, the less you explain. The more centered you are, the less you seek. You don't chase validation. You don't fear silence. You don't collapse when misunderstood, because your foundation is no longer external. It's built from values, from discipline, from moments of quiet, where you chose to stay true to yourself, even when it was difficult. And when people challenge that, when life tests that, you won't panic. You'll pause. You'll breathe. You'll listen to the discomfort without rushing to escape it. And from that space, you'll move not to protect your ego, but to preserve your peace. You'll start to live differently. Slower, maybe, but deeper. With more intent. With more awareness of how much energy you used to give to things that never deserved it. You'll realize that being unbothered isn't about staying calm for show. It's about living in a way that no longer requires you to recover from everything. It's about choosing emotional health over emotional theater, strength over reaction, wholeness over noise. The world will keep turning. People will keep talking. Life will remain unpredictable. But none of that has to decide who you are. You get to choose. You get to filter. You get to protect what matters. Not by fighting harder, but by guarding smarter. Not by proving more, but by needing less. And not by being better than others, but by being faithful to the quiet promise you made to yourself. So train for it, every day, in small moments. When someone interrupts you, when someone tests your patience, when silence feels uncomfortable, when rejection knocks at your door. Train in those moments, because they are the gym, the space where your character is built, not performed. And over time, the world may not change, but you will. You'll carry yourself differently. You'll speak with more intention. You'll stand taller, not out of pride, but out of alignment. And when people ask how you became so composed, so grounded, so calm, you won't say much. You'll just smile. Because the truth is, they didn't see the work, the quiet choices, the hard pauses, the restraint, the resolve. But you'll know. You trained for this. And now, nothing outside of you can shake what lives within.